Thanks for watching. This is my Axial SCX6. This is a Jeep JLU, at least that's how it started, and I'm turning it into a Jeep Gladiator. If you want to follow along with the entire process, because this is the second of the videos that I'm making about it, make sure that you hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you can stay up to date with what I'm doing over here. It's free, by the way. Currently it sits like this. I will take all of the stuff that I machined off just so you have a good idea of my thought process. There's a bunch of cardboard over here. I will explain to you how my brain kind of works and what I did to make this happen so far, because it is a really enjoyable process. It is also a pretty intricate process, so I might have to split this video up in two different parts. I'm not sure yet. In the last video I extended the chassis, so the frame rails, those are actually already split on an Axial SCX6, so you can adjust the length on those. I also added a second skid plate just to have some extra length in there and also make it sturdy, and I also added some extra length to the rear drive shaft. If you want to check out how I did that, make sure that you check out the video that I will post here. This is like a clickable link thingamabob, so you can have a look at what I did. I extended the wheelbase with 72 millimeters, and I also retracted the rear bumper another 17 millimeters. So that's 72 plus 17. Total body length will be added 89 millimeters to make it look like it currently does. Okay, well, let's get into it. Let's take all of this stuff off and see what I did. It is currently stripped back to the point where this sat, I guess, a week or a week and a half ago. From here you need to determine what measurements are fixed and what you can use to start building from. One thing that I knew is that I wanted to reuse the front body mount position, so there's nothing altered over there, so that's all good to go. I also want to use the rear body mounts, but perhaps not in this fashion, so we will go through that a tiny bit later. I know that the interior panel is bolted to the cab section below that cowl section. I'm still really bad at muting my stuff. But below the cowl section, so there are two screws holding that interior panel in place. So that's also a fixed distance essentially to the front body posts. So with that you also know that this distance to the front is kind of predetermined by building it up like this. Another thing that I know is that I cut the cab right behind those rear doors. There's 30 millimeters of space going on between this body panel line and where I made the actual cut. This cut is completely vertical. That also makes it a lot easier to work with. And I put the cut over here just because I knew that I wanted to maintain this roll cage in there, just to add some stiffness and also be able to build on it in a really reliable fashion. So with that being determined, I also knew that I wanted to keep these two roll cage posts over here. That of course gives me a nice and stiff assembly once everything is put together. Now when you start making some decisions in that fashion, you kind of end up making a couple of sketches, or at least I like sketching it out, and then I wanted it to look something like this. So over there as well you can see that there's a roll cage, potentially even a spare wheel, but I know that for the base I need to have a flat base right here, and then I need to have an upright that hopefully wraps around that roll cage that sits on top of it, and then I need of course something to attach it to those rear body posts. Those couple of factors are a given, and with that it's really easy to start measuring. Another thing that I wanted to keep is this rear body panel. So this comes from the lower side of the tailgate. I also knew that I wanted to reuse this just so I can put those taillights in. I know that this is not Gladiator accurate, but we kind of need to wing it and work with what we got as well. This panel sits against that rear bumper. Now I pulled the rear bumper out another 17 millimeters. So I know that this panel moved back another 17 millimeters as well. I also know that I extended the chassis, the wheelbase, with 72 millimeters. So overall I know that I have a gap of 89 millimeters that I need to bridge. In order to make that really understandable for myself, I just clamped two rulers in the gap between the body and that rear panel with 89 millimeters in between, so I can start measuring what is going to be on top over here. The main reason to start measuring on top is because this is a really nice flat panel. This is black styrene, so this isn't a Lexan interior, and the back of it is 100% flat. If you take away a couple of pieces, so I actually trimmed out 6 pieces, 2 from the bottom just to make it sit flush on those rear wheel arches, and 4 sections from the top, just to ensure that I could fully flat mount my pieces to this piece of black styrene. From there you have a really nice surface to work with and to measure from. And that looks something like this. This is as rudimentary as it gets. This is 4 sheets of paper taped together so I could make a full-sized drawing of what I wanted to create over here. I knew that I wanted to have a U-shaped bracket just in case I want to perhaps do something different here in the long run, with spare wheels perhaps angling down, or perhaps 2 spare wheels sitting side by side. So I want to have a panel in this area over here that is kind of hollowed out. Also, I want to machine this from Delrin. Delrin is pretty heavy, 6 millimeters of Delrin. If you would have a full Delrin sheet in here, it becomes way too heavy and you don't want to do that. So I wanted to have a U-shaped bracket laying on top of the section right here. After I was done making my initial design, I cut out half of that U-shaped bracket because you do want to save as much material as possible eventually when machining it. And then I basically just test fit this. This gives you a really good idea to see if you're in the right ballpark when it comes to taking your measurements and making your design. I hope all of this makes sense. Once I was done sketching everything out on paper and test fitting it by cutting out this simple piece of paper, and knowing that I was at least in the right range with taking my measurements, I started to put everything in the computer, and I also decided that I wanted to make a couple of gaps inside of this panel work, just to make sure that I took away the most amount of weight possible without risking any of the rigidity. That results in a piece that looks something like this. Now in this case I just removed this and this just so I could fit it. So I took the screw out from the bottom of the roll cage in this particular part, just so I can slide this around and test fit it, see if I needed to adjust anything at all. A couple of little tweaks were absolutely needed in this entire process. So that's also why you see that I have multiple sets of cardboard laying around over here. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to do this in cardboard first, because it makes sure that you do not waste any material. You can make tiny adjustments. So here as well you can kind of see the evolution of this particular piece. So I started out having like a tiny little finger over here that attaches into the front section of the body panel or of that interior panel, and that evolves to become a tiny bit bigger and a bit stronger until it eventually looked like this. Once I had this shape and I knew my angle was correct, and I also knew that the distance between these two corners was the exact same as I had over here, so I had a completely parallel line, that's when I knew that this piece was essentially finished and I could start machining this from Delrin. Seeing that I use a 2D drawing program that does not allow you for any tool changes, this is where it becomes really complicated. You do need to copy your drawing if you want to add, for example, like I did, a chamfered edge. Makes it look a bit more technical and a bit more finished and a bit less homemade. So in my case, some of these parts consist of 2 or 3 separate drawings, but you can of course just use the cutout version. I will make sure that all of these files are available at some point, so you can download them, perhaps go to your local CNC shop and have your parts machined for you. So far I hope that this is a clear story and not too complicated. Once you have these 2 parts completed and you have put them sort of where you want them to go, you can also see that I wanted to have a different option for this body mount. There is a ton of leverage going on with the body being this long, and then of course also with all these machine parts in the back, if you were to maintain the body mount the way it is currently. So what I decided to do was I decided to flip it around, so I'm using it with the license plate facing forward, and what that gives me is a lot more strength in it, having less levering force on this exact position. Now this is of course a nice looking part, but I do want to maintain this license plate. I want to put that on that body panel eventually, because otherwise I need to come up with something, and I don't really want to do that. So I do want to use these two brackets, these are actually two different parts, and make my own bracket that attaches to this base that I've currently created. So in order to do that, you basically just put it in here and start measuring to what you have created on top over here. What that gave me is this part initially, and then I put it in place, so I attached it to those two body mounts. And then when I had it installed, I decided that I did not completely like the look of it, so this evolved into this. Took my measurements from there, altered it a tiny bit, and then eventually I machined a part that looks like this. So there you can sort of see the evolution that you go through when you make stuff out of cardboard in order to make it look good. This part, I'm really happy with the way that this looks. It attaches to the chassis in a really factory-like fashion, I think. It is really strong, and it attaches to those two brackets that I have sitting on top also very nicely. I will install this, also attach those two brackets, that U-shaped bracket on top, so you can see exactly what that looks like, and also have a look at what I machined out of the top of those two brackets before moving up to the top section. Just before I forget it, one part that I did need to factor in for this body mount was that this is not a flat piece. So this license plate holder, perhaps it looks flat, but it isn't. So these two sides, there's actually a little step down in the bottom to the top. So you can tell over there, I need to make a notch in this area right here in order for them to sit flush against that new bracket. So what I did is I machined a pocket out of this Delrin just to make it attach completely flush. You can also see that I machined a couple of pockets out of the material just to keep it as light as possible, just like I did with those top pieces. With these top pieces as well, you can see that it's really easy in cardboard to determine where you need to have those pockets machined out to make it look good, but also to still make it be sturdy enough for its intended purpose. So again, instead of using it like this, I'm using it like that. Pushes the mounting point forward quite a bit, and in making it look good but also keeping it rigid, that is really important. Right here you can see that little step that's in here. Now, if you have access to a CNC machine, it is really tempting to do everything on the CNC machine, but well, some parts are just easier to do it by hand. So in this case, countersinking these couple of screws, I did that with my regular drill, just countersunk them from this side. Looks as good as it needs to look, basically. I cannot stress the importance of using cardboard for your prototyping enough. You can tell that there's a nice flat section over here. I would not have been able to determine how far down I could go with my piece if it wasn't for using some cardboard in the prototyping phase. So once I put my body mount in position right now, it looks like this. You can also see that it lines up with that pocket on that flat section really well. This is a really nice and sturdy body mounting position once those body pins are in. It also lines up with the underside of these brackets really well. You can also tell that those holes line up. Time to put that section on and see what that looks like. This is one of those Delrin pieces that I machined that will end up being, this is half of that U-shaped bracket, so this is the far side. You can also see that I machined a couple of pockets out of it. Now these pockets, it's 3 pockets eventually once you have joined those 2 sections up. These are for the roll bar, so I wanted to have something that can fit inside of these pockets eventually. Now I know where that roll bar needs to sit because I actually want to push the roll bar over the body a tiny bit by machining out the pocket. We will get into that later. So with that I also know where I want to have this pocket, because this pocket just needs to be pushed 2.5 millimeters forward compared to where this body currently ends. So measuring all of that stuff is really easy, and then of course if you do it like I did it over here, it is just a matter of mirroring your item, and then you have the part that you need for the other side, so you eventually have a full section. An important part to keep over here is this area that attaches to the roll cage, just because this adds a ton of stiffness with it having a couple of different edges going on. And an important section to take out is this corner right here, because this will allow you to machine a finger to that U-shaped section that you can then push in. So I know that sounds really weird, but you really want to have some sort of extra material right here that you can attach to that interior panel and add some stiffness to that entire area that you have modified quite heavily by taking out those notches. So for now, just for fitment purposes, I took out the 1 screw that sits in the bottom over here. That way I can work this piece around it like such, and then see how it eventually fits. Here you see that the importance of having that finger to put the finger in the hole. So right there, that fits nicely, and then it wraps around that cage part like this, and then it lines up with that bracket that we made to attach the body to the chassis in the back. Let's have a look at this roll bar section that I machined. This piece right here, I think when it comes to drawing it up, this was the most difficult one, just because it needed to follow all of those ridges in that roof area of the cab. Usually if you would have a Gladiator, this would be flat. Of course, with me having a modified JLU, that's not as easy as it otherwise would have been. So you need to machine all of these ridges into that panel. After you cut the body, it does become a tiny bit flimsy, so you want to re-add some rigidity. If you take out the entire back section, you can imagine that if this was a box, for example, if you take the side out of a box, then as well it becomes really flimsy. So it's the same with this body. So by adding this track that the body can fit into, you kind of re-add that stiffness to the back of the body. Now you can tell from the bottom over here that I did add those 3 lips that fit inside of these pockets, inside of these slots that I machined out of that the bracket over here. So with that, this will all attach together pretty nicely. And then by adding this track around the cab that this will fit into, I really have a super stiff connection. In order to test fit this, I will show you what I did. Now this is the sheet of Delrin that I used. Delrin is really technical but also very expensive. So do make sure that you don't let any material go to waste, because that will cost you a ton of money. So machine everything out of cardboard before you turn it into a Delrin piece. Over here, once I turn this around, you can see that these are all test cuts for that cab section. So what I did, I had the cab section sitting over here. The back area of that is entirely flat, so I could just fit it on the spot and see how and where I needed to adjust my drawing. So over here as well, you see some pencil lines going on. I just took this and then went back to the computer, altered my drawing, did another test cut just to see also how wide of a cut I needed to make for it to fit properly. And this is then eventually the very last test cut that I did before turning this into a Delrin piece. I hope it all still makes sense. So, after the MDF, it then eventually looks like this. We will now attach this to that U-shaped bracket that sits on top, and then slide all of this stuff around the cage. I will show you that part as well. Now, as a test fit, this is working just like this, of course, with it having all those fingers and then those pockets that slot into each other. But eventually I do want to attach this to that interior panel. So for that reason, all of the holes that I drilled inside of this piece, that will attach a screw from through this part into that roll bar section. I do want to put those through the interior as well. So what I did, I completely dismantled the cage so I could accurately, let's see if that gets picked up on camera, accurately drill some holes in that black styrene of the interior panel. So what we will do right now is we will take the interior panel out, or I will take the entire body off. Hopefully I'll be able to register that on camera as well, because this will become a tiny bit tricky. And then attach this entire contraption right here to that, and then eventually also to that body mounting bracket that sits in the back. Now these two posts of the roll cage, those two are detached, so that should make it a bit easier for me to slide this roll bar section around it. There is of course that cut on the front side that the body will fit into. For now we don't have to worry about that too much. Then we have these two parts right here that will fit on top of that back section of the interior panel. So that slots into position just like so. And then what we have to do, and this is a tiny bit tricky I think to pick up on camera, but then what we have to do is make all of this fit together like such, so I can eventually put those 6 screws in the bottom of that interior panel and have one big sturdy connection. Now before I fully tighten them down, you can tell that these screws, they thread in through the bottom, and then they go through this piece right here and into that roll bar section. So with that you kind of sandwich everything together and also really push those lips into place so they fully connect to those pockets. Now currently I have those 6 screws. They sit in the bottom, so everything is attached together. This will sit flush with that interior panel like that. So currently the only thing left to do is ensure that I put the screws back in the bottom of the roll cage, so all of this is tight. You can tell that it is a really nice and close fit with the existing roll cage to have this roll bar wrapped around it. I wanted to have this a bit higher than the roof, so eventually I do intend on also 3D printing one of those front runner roof racks from Night Customs, so this sits nice and flush with the top of that roll bar. Time to attach this to this. Well, that's that. So far everything is in place. So we got the front body mounting position. That is exactly the same as it was. I right now have a new rear body mounting position, so all of this attaches to the chassis in a really nice and tight fashion. And I have a really good base to build the rest of my stuff on. Well, let's cut it off over there. Next week I will show you how to make these. I hope that I managed to show you in this week's video how you can make a ton of cool stuff using cardboard and some paper and a ruler and a pen and just some basic logics. So far I think this is coming along really nicely, and I hope you agree with me. Again, if you have not subscribed yet, please do. We are really closing in on 100,000 subscribers, and I would really like to get there this year, hopefully. So also share this video with your friends. If you have any questions or comments, or perhaps you are already thinking ahead and you think, hey Chris, it would be really nice if you paint this thing pink or whatever, let me know. If you have color scheme or paint scheme ideas, let me know in the comment section. Links, of course, to everything that you see in this video. So also to the Spec RC rims, but also to the Axial SCX6. All of that stuff is in the video description, so you can check it out. Again, check out the first video as well if you have not seen that yet. Making this is really not that difficult. I hope that this video shows you that any idiot can do it. Thank you so much for watching. Take care, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.
Back on.